Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islam Between the Lines. My name is Farooq. This is the third episode on topic of taxation. In the preceding two episodes, we have seen, among other things, that overtaxing is outrightly rejected by Islam as highly offensive and unpleasant. Islam, while conceding to the government the power to tax, denies it the liberty to impose any and every tax of its choice. An Islamic government can levy only those taxes that are permitted by Islam. A beautiful example of this limitation was set by the second Caliph Umar, who was once approached by some Syrian nobles, stating that they have acquired some wealth of livestock and slaves and would love to pay zakat from it for its purification. They were non-Muslims. Umar said that he shall do only what his friends have done before. He consulted the Prophet's companions, including Ali, who said, "It is better, provided that it does not become a regular jizya and is collected from them after you also." Musnad Ahmad, chapter 2, hadith numbers 1 and 135. Thus, this commercial tax was not allowed to be linked to the faith of the payers. Coming to the real taxes in Islam, we have verse 141 of chapter 6 of Quran that authorizes collection of a production tax in these words: "Eat of their, with the gardens, fruit when they fructify, and do pay their due on the day of harvesting." Unquote. In this way, Quran has declared the product tax as a right of the produce and has made it payable as and when the produce is harvested. So, whenever the quantity of a produce exceeds a certain measure, zakat becomes payable on it as and when its harvesting happens, regardless of whether the produce is or is not meant for sale. The owner has to pay zakat as owner, no matter if he becomes or does not become a seller of the produce. The gamut of this right of the produce was enlarged by the first Caliph Abu Bakr when he fought against the renegades who had refused to pay zakat, and in defending his fight against them, he said that zakat is a right of the property. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 24, hadith number 5. Sahih Muslim, chapter 1, hadith number 32. So every zakat is a right of the property from which it is to be taken. This means that a small portion of every property has the right to go into the hands of the state from those of the taxpayers. In other words, state has a claim to small portion of private property and is entitled to receive it. From the state's perspective, therefore, zakat is its charge on private property. That's another import of the expression right of the property. The extent of this claim or charge of the state on private property has been marked down by the Prophet by saying that nothing is due on the property except zakat. Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 8, hadith number 7. Therefore, state can have nothing more than its limited share of zakat from the people's properties. People have the fundamental right to have and enjoy their properties. As the entitlement to zakat is conferred on the state by Quran itself, no consent or permission of the people is required for the same. In other words, the power of state to tax its people is divine and not democratic. The nature of zakat as state's charge on private property is the quintessence of Islamic taxation. It underlines the inviolable principle that zakat is leviable on properties only and not on persons, not even on slaves. Though zakat is practically realized from the persons owning the taxable properties, but that's only because of these properties. If a person ceases to own any taxable property, he will also cease to be liable for any zakat. In effect, zakat is payable by the person who has the property from which it is due. Since Islam uses only one word, mal, to mention all types of property, zakat is therefore due from the property in its both forms of income as well as wealth. There's one type of zakat which is seemingly levied on persons. Allah's Apostle enjoined payment of one sa, approximately 3 kilograms, of dates or one sa of barley as zakatul fitr on every Muslim slave or free, male or female, young or old. And he ordered it to be paid before people went out for Eid prayer. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 24, hadith number 104. The nomenclature is loosely applied though. This same zakatul fitr is also referred to as the sadaqatul fitr and sadaqatul Ramadan, hadith number 111 of the same chapter. In its virtue, zakatul fitr is also payable only because of the property by those Muslims who have it and is paid to those who do not have it. It's payable towards the end of the fasting month of Ramadan to ensure that the poor also celebrate the Eid after fasting. Essentially, yet, zakatul fitr is not a tax because it is paid by the payers directly to the payees and is neither collected nor used by the state. Taxing only their properties is the stepping stone towards protection of the people against the profanity of foul taxes. This principle grants complete exemption to the poor and the penurious who do not have any taxable properties at a given time. That's utterly dissimilar to our modern taxation, which, though famed as sales tax, is a purchase tax in pith and substance, as it is indirectly collected through the sellers. It's assumed to become payable by dint of sales affected by them, but in fact it's only the buyers who bear its brunt as and when they dare to go shopping. Varied names of sales tax, excise duty, value-added tax, goods and services tax, etc., have been employed for this tax, which, however, remains a purchase tax that is loaded only on the buyers for buying any goods or services. By its very nature, purchase tax is literally a fine for living because we use goods and services to live. 4 basic necessities of life are food, water, clothing and shelter. None of these is acquired without the onus of this burden. Ideally, a goods seller or a service provider ought to be taxed for his assets, but the buyer who avails of these goods and services to sustain his life is taxed, literally for his efforts to live. And then on ground this inequity brooks no limits. We give some alms to a beggarly person who buys something essential with it. He is also taxed. We buy things for funeral rites. We pay tax, this time for dying. Looks like a comedy of errors that in a democracy our own delegates fleece us and, so to say, for us. The difference between product tax and the purchase tax could be arguably ignored if it were just academic or philosophical. There are 2 major ill effects of the purchase tax. On the one hand, it fails to tax those rich sellers who own the wealth of their products, and on the other, it exacts tax from all the innocent buyers. This second effect in turn cascades as a wild factor for unending escalation of prices. A government is indeed competent to regulate the prices of certain essential items or services, but that function is not driven by any profit motive. On the contrary, Through the regime of purchase tax, the government increases the prices primarily for its own fiscal gains. Tax hike on cigarettes and liquor is always projected as a move to discourage smoking and drinking, but real target remains the increase in revenue. These consumers are playing with their lives, but government indifferently continues to make its money. Similarly, entertainment tax hits at the core of your right to happiness. You want to entertain yourself for a while. Government rules that you can do it only after you pay a tax, as if proclaiming, don't enjoy, don't pay. Gloom is tax-free. In sharp contrast to this, Allah has prescribed the produce tax, and His Apostle has capped its limit at tithe or ushr in Arabic. As this cap of tithe cannot be breached, this production tax came to be known as ushr also. Sub-tithe taxes are permissible, over tithe are not. The Prophet himself had reduced it to half or 5% where the irrigation was not natural. Sahih Bukhari chapter 24, hadith number 83. Sahih Muslim chapter 12, hadith number 10. Abu Dawood chapter 9, hadith number 42. Above this cap of 10%, exceptional 1/5 or 20%, zakat is charged on the treasures and minerals. Sahih Bukhari chapter 24, hadith number 99. Sahih Muslim chapter 29, hadith number 68. Jamia Tirmidhi chapter 7, hadith number 26. Of the war booties, also 1/5 or khums goes to the state, and the rest is distributed among the warriors. Quran chapter 8, verse 41. The Prophet once said, "What Allah has made spoils for you is not mine, except the 1/5, and that 1/5 is also returned to you." Muwatta Malik, chapter 21, hadith 22. Produce tax becomes payable at the time of harvesting. The number of crops that are grown and harvested in an area depends on the geographical conditions of that area. So the tax on produce of land is payable in a geography according to the number of crops cultivated in a year. However, in respect of livestock and other businesses, this tax has been annualized to make it payable only once in a year. No zakat would be payable until a year had passed. Sunan Ibn Majah chapter 8, hadith number 10. Musnad Ahmad chapter 5, hadith number 671. Muwatta Malik chapter 17, hadith number 6. Annualization of tax on livestock, merchandise and services is understandable, but it is not to be confused with the annual zakat of 40th part or 2.5% that's payable on surplus wealth held for a year. That form of zakat needs to be differentiated from the zakat of ushr. Variation in the rates of zakat that was charged on livestock shows that it was not the zakat on surplus wealth, whose rate is static 2.5%. Here is the example. The Prophet had written a letter about zakat, but he died before he could send it to the governors. He had kept it with his sword and it remained there. Later on, Abu Bakr acted upon it. Abu Dawood chapter 9, hadith number 13. The letter prescribed zakat of 1 goat for 5 camels, 2 for 10, 3 for 15, and 4 for 20. For 25 to 30 camels, it prescribed zakat of 1 one-year-old camel. The age of the zakat camel increased with the increase in number of camels owned. It also prescribed 1 goat for 40 to 120 goats. When we calculate percentage of these numbers, none of them comes to 2.5%. 1 camel used to be treated as equivalent to 10 goats. The rate of 1 goat for 5 camels or 50 goats means 2% only. Similarly, 1 camel for 25 camels means 4%. And the same 1 camel for 35 camels means 2.86%. This much variation was unavoidable as that zakat used to be paid in kind. But in any case, it was not 2.5% charged on the surplus wealth. Another example is this. Ali was the youngest one to embrace Islam and later on became a son-in-law of the Prophet. Pressed by hunger, he too had tied a stone on his belly during the famous Battle of Trench. Later on, he had come to own the assets on which he paid a zakat of 40,000 dinars. Musnad Ahmad chapter 5 hadith 767. 1 dinar used to have 4.25 grams of gold approximately. This means that his zakat was 170,000 grams or 170 kilograms of gold. If we take it as 40th part of the annual zakat on wealth, then his wealth must have been 40 times as much or 6,800 kilograms of gold to be precise. This is almost 7 tons of gold. This is unbelievable. A companion of the Prophet of Islam cannot be said to have accumulated 7 tons of gold and held the same for 1 year before paying 170 kilograms as zakat from it. On the contrary, this much zakat paid by Ali must be the tithe of his merchandise. In that case, 40,000 dinars or 170 kilograms of gold was only 10% of his business assets, which were 10 times that amount of zakat. That works out to 400,000 dinars or 1,700 kilograms of gold or its worth of business assets. This is a fairly reasonable figure. Zubair radiallahu anhu was co-brother of the Prophet, died during the Caliphate of Usman. He had people's deposits worth 2,200,000 as debt. His son looked out for the depositors during 4 seasons of the annual pilgrimage or Hajj and repaid their deposits many-folded. In the 5th year only, he distributed the property among the legal heirs. That too after satisfying a will to the tune of 1/9. Zubair was survived by 4 widows, and their collective 1/8 share only was a whopping 48,000. Sahih Bukhari chapter 57 hadith number 38. This hadith mentions these figures without using the word dinar or dirham with them. The prosperity of the state of Medina during the last part of the Prophet's own period remains generally understated. He had fixed blood money for homicide as 100 camels for camel owners, 200 cows for cattle owners, 1,000 sheep for sheep owners, and 200 suits for suit owners. Abu Dawud chapter 41 hadith number 50. As per hadith number 49, he had fixed blood money at 800 dinars or 8,000 dirhams. Deducing from these figures, we find that 1 camel was equivalent to 2 cows, 10 sheep, 2 suits, or 8 dinars. In other words, 1 suit was worth 4 dinars or 17 grams of gold. At present gold rate in India, the cost of this suit would be around 90,000 rupees. Obviously, these luxury suits must have also generated zakat of the same handsome proportion. The Prophet himself had also instructed Mu'adh to take a dinar from every non-Muslim adult or its worth in ma'afir, a Yemeni cloth. Jamia Tirmizi chapter 7 hadith 7. Apart from these luxury suits and cloth, the same market of Medina was also capable of producing super luxury suits. The king of Zu Yazan presented to the Prophet a dress that he had procured for 33 camels. The Prophet returned to him a similar gift, which he purchased for 20 and several more camels. Abu Dawud chapter 34 hadith 15 and 16. Now 33 camels were equivalent to 264 dinars or 1122 grams of gold. If we take price of Prophet's return gift as 27 camels, That too was equivalent to 216 dinars or 918 grams of gold. So on both sides, the price of this one item ran into millions. The point here is that with the desired freedom to prosper, the markets will certainly generate adequate and handsome volumes of business and zakat. The Prophet has levied zakat on almost all activities. He took a tithe of honey, Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 8, hadith number 42, and also of annualized rent, Muwatta Malik, chapter 17, hadith 7, to name just two. In short, zakat collection for the state will automatically increase with the growth in number of commercial activities and their volumes. Unlike the fixed rate of 1/40th of the surplus wealth, below the ceiling of tithe, the rates of zakat on produce and services are variable, to be determined from time to time by the government, considering the volume and the input cost of every taxable activity. This is the general principle. Exceptionally, for interstate trade, though, this power can be exercised for different reasons also. Umar used to take reduced 1/5, that is half tithe, from the cereals and olive oil of Nabatean Christians, intending thereby to increase their supplies to Medina. On the other hand, he would take tithe or 1/10 of the pulses, Muwatta Malik, chapter 17, hadith 43. The exemption limits prescribed by the Prophet are less than 5 camels or 5 awq of silver or 5 awsuq of grain or 20 dinars of gold. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 24, hadith 50. 5 awq of silver is equivalent to about 200 dirhams or 595 grams of silver at the rate of 2.975 grams. 5 awsuq of grain are equal to 300 saws or 900 kilograms or 9 quintals. 20 dinars are equal to 85 grams of gold at the rate of 4.25 grams. When production of a food grain exceeds the exemption limit of 9 quintals, zakat becomes payable on it. In commercial production of grains, obviously the grower's income comes from their sale. In that sense, zakat of tithe can be called the income tax, yet in another sense it is not income tax as we know the latter. Income tax becomes payable as and when the income accrues or is generated, but Islamic zakat precedes that stage and becomes payable at the production stage only. In case of trade, stocks and the services, the assessment process is annualized, but zakat remains payable independent of sales. That may be the reason why even advance payment of zakat was also permitted by the Prophet. Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 8, hadith 13. Zakat of Ushr is also known by the name of Kharaj. The first name is derived from the maximum rate of Ushr or tithe, while the other is derived from the nature of the tax, Kharaj or exaction. Abdullah bin Zubair said that his father Zubair was never appointed to govern or collect Kharaj or any other thing. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 57, hadith 38. The reason was that he was a big businessman, as we discussed above. Another companion, Ala bin Hadrami, said, "The Apostle of Allah sent me to Bahrain or Hajar, and I used to go to a garden that was shared by some brothers, of whom one had become Muslim. And I would take Ushr from the Muslim and Kharaj from the polytheists." Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 8, hadith 49. To sum up, we may say that Islamic commercial tax is a direct tax of up to 10% payable by the owner on taxable volume of goods and services. The comparison of the two regimes of our sales tax and the Islamic production tax goes far beyond the tax rates. For an example, a company manufactures 10,000 cars of one model in a given year. Based on its marketability, the price of the model is fixed by the company, and the tax load on that price is decided by the government. The beast of the entire burden is the animal called the customer. The company collects the sales tax with unit-wise sales by its dealers. The tax so collected over a period of time is deposited at the end of that period with the government. Now, in case of production tax, the same company would continue to use its own strategy to price its cars, but these would become available on that price only. And with that valuation, the company would pay tax on that value regardless of the actual sales. The government shall thus receive the whole tax from this taxpayer without any dependence on sales of the cars to third parties that the customers are. The other advantages of this mechanism would also avail naturally. The company will not go for overproduction with the help of lenders' money and subsequently book losses for sales failure to dupe both its lenders as well as the government. Also, the smaller players would be saved from dumping practice of the company, which will think twice before paying more tax on mere production for deferred sales. On its part, the government will also find it easy to keep a check on tax evasion because auditing one producer will be obviously far easier and simpler than auditing so many traders affecting the retail sales. With this, I conclude this third episode with my best wishes, as usual, for improvement in the social media, which afford free global platforms to everyone without any fear of favor. Thank you so much for watching.